Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason Del Rosa, and you're listening to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We are almost at the halfway point. We are about to enter week 4, which means next week we have teams on byes, getting ready for district play. The halfway point of the season will have officially arrived. Can you believe it? I can't. To think that we've already played this many games already. And the end of the season is going to be in sight as we jockey for positions once we get into that district play. It's amazing how the time flies when there's a game every Friday to pay attention to. Have some interesting results from last week. Got some really big games on the schedule this week, and we will talk about all that as we get ready for week 4 of the high school football season. I will get the teams that did not play this last week out of the way first, especially because one of them is not going to play again this week. But there is one district game on the schedule this week that is in District 7-5A Division 2, and that is the Denison Yellow Jackets traveling to Lovejoy. Denison did not play last week. They had their bye as everybody else in the district started district play. And so Denison had 2 weeks to prepare for what is probably going to be the toughest game on their schedule in terms of an opponent, maybe not in terms of a hype sense, because obviously the Battle of the Axe is always going to get the most attention when it's a Denison schedule or a Sherman schedule. But if that game is 1A, this game is definitely 1B. And especially because it is one of the premier games in the state this week, because you have Lovejoy, who is ranked number 3 in 5A Division 2. They have been number 3 all season long, the preseason rankings, and they've obviously stayed there. They're 3-0 and 1-0 in district play after winning last week against Princeton, 69-21. And like you mentioned, Denison did not play. They are 2-0. And after their win against Brewer 2 weeks ago, they jumped into the top 10 in the 5A Division 2 rankings. They checked in at number 9, and despite not playing last week and having some other teams in the rankings lose, Denison is up to number 7 this week. So you will have 2 of the perceived top 7 teams in the state, number 3 versus number 7, and a hold on first place, depending on the other outcomes in the district, is on the line, as well as I think the winner sort of cementing themselves as the early front runner. I think, as I mentioned before, I think Frisco is a team that is probably, if it's only one notch below these two, they're on that same sort of top tier, and so I think they're looking at this matchup eager to see what happens, because I think they view themselves as the next in line to the throne here in District 7-5A Division 2. There were no real surprises, I don't think, in their district play. Lovejoy won over Princeton. Frisco won its opener against Lake Dallas in a big way. They put up 70 points in that one. Liberty beat Rock Hill. That score was probably a lot closer than what some people thought. That was only a touchdown score margin. And Frisco Memorial beat Lebanon Trail. Maybe some people thought that might be a Lebanon Trail win, but Frisco Memorial comes out on top there. So early on, no surprises. Frisco has the bye this week, so we won't see what they can do. The big game after Denison Lovejoy in this district is Frisco Liberty is going to take on Frisco Memorial. The winner of that obviously would have the upper hand in terms of a playoff spot, jockeying in the early going based on tiebreakers, and will sort of assert itself as maybe a dark horse to get one of the top couple spots in the district play. I think Liberty's probably the favorite there, but Frisco Memorial's off to a good start. Everybody in this district is really off to a good start. Liberty, Lovejoy, Frisco, and Frisco Memorial are all 3-0, and of course Denison is 2-0. They didn't play last week, one of Denison and Lovejoy is going to lose, and one of Liberty and Memorial is going to lose. But like I said, you got to essentially the first 3 weeks of the season, and 5 of the teams are still undefeated. So it says how good the district is, and so that's where we're at going into this game. I don't know what to expect, and the reason for that is you have a team in Lovejoy that is putting up monster points. They put up 69 points this last week. They put up 71 points the week before. So they're averaging 61 points so far this season. The offense has led them. It's I don't want to say it's typical Lovejoy because I feel like it's sort of ramped up Lovejoy. They did have some key pieces to replace at quarterback. Ralph Rucker was the quarterback. They had a sophomore take over, Alexander Franklin, and they haven't skipped a beat. Riley Westervelt, the big wide receiver, who was their main guy last year, he's gone. But then they've replaced him pretty well. So it's sort of business as usual, but they've been a little bit better. I don't know if the quality of the opponent that they've played the first 3 weeks is maybe indicative. I think Denison's obviously going to be the best team that they're going to play to this point, and they may be the best team. Like I said, them and Frisco are probably the best two teams that Lovejoy is going to face before they get to the playoffs. So obviously Lovejoy does their thing on offense, and Denison's defense is obviously the key in this one. It's what I'm going to be writing about to preview this game. You have all these seniors. You have all these 3-year starters. The 2 games against Lovejoy the last 2 years have come down to the very end. 2 years ago, when they were sophomores, the game went into overtime. Denison had a lead in the fourth quarter, couldn't hang on to it. Same thing last year. You have a game come down to the end. Denison actually went for it on fourth down to try in their own territory to extend a drive late. They ended up giving the ball back to Lovejoy, who ended up scoring in the final minute, and that was the difference there. So that was a game that could have potentially gone to overtime as well. And so Denison has had their opportunities to win the last 2 matchups against Lovejoy. They have not been able to do it. And not I don't want to put all the blame on the defense, but the defense has had chances to get stops in both of those games, and they have not been able to do it. And so that's where we stand into this matchup of a really good offense against a defense that's been really good so far. You look at the 2 opponents that Denison has played. Sherman, who we'll get to here in a minute, they've scored at least 36 in their 2 games. Denison held them to 13 in the opener. And then you look at Brewer. Brewer's a team that has played well, very explosive, with some athletes, and Denison was able to, that game was 41-7 early in the fourth quarter, and it ended up being 42-21, and you had one of the scores on a kickoff return, so that wasn't exactly on the defense's fault, and the last one, some backups were in there. So Denison has looked good on defense the last couple of games, or in both of their games that they've had, and so it's going to be interesting to see. I don't think anybody can shut down this offense, this Lovejoy offense, but I don't know if Denison needs to do that because they can. They have an offense that can. I don't know if it can match them fully score for score, but if it is a shootout, I think they can make the plays, and the Denison offense can score some points. They come into this game, they're averaging almost 40 points a game. I know that looks minor compared to when the team's averaging 61 points a game, but we only have 2 data points for Denison so far because they had the bye last week. So this is a monster game. Denison has never beaten Lovejoy, so that's always something to look at. Lovejoy has won all 7 of the meetings, and they've won in a variety of ways. It's not always the same way. It's not always the same sort of outcome. The games have been close. Games haven't been close. They've done it, running the ball. They've done it passing the ball. They've done it shutting down Denison's offense. It's just one of those things right now that Lovejoy has the upper hand over Denison, and for whatever reason they find a way to make the plays. I don't think it makes a difference that it's at Lovejoy. Like I said, when they played there 2 years ago, Denison had a chance to win the game in the fourth quarter. / in overtime. So I don't think that the venue makes a difference in this one. But it's expected to be a great game. I don't think, rankings and all that stuff doesn't matter in the long run. Ultimately, whoever wins this game is going to be the favorite to win the district championship, and the loser, it's going to come down to probably what they do against Frisco, because then we'll start looking at tiebreakers along the way, and where people get slotted as we get to the second half of the schedule. So Denison didn't play last week, but they obviously have the biggest game of the week, not just in the area, but also on a statewide level. A lot of people, I'm sure, are going to be looking at this game, what the score is, how close it is, and who wins it for sure. So we'll see what happens when Denison goes to Lovejoy. And, of course, Denison, in their district, they play all 7 o'clock starts. So if you're headed down there to Leopard Stadium, just be aware that it is a 7 o'clock start down at Lovejoy. So that's what Denison's going to be up to. Sherman will be closing out non-district play with a home game at Bearcat Stadium. They will be hosting McKinney. Both teams are 2-1. Both are coming off victories last week. McKinney won 35-9 against Rowlett, and Sherman won 52-10 against Saginaw. Sherman has a chance to end non-district play on a 3-game winning streak. They started, as we know, with the last-second Hail Mary victory over Mount Pleasant. They did not need anything close to those heroics last week against Saginaw in a game that was pretty much over at halftime. It was 35-3 at halftime. It was 21-0. It was 21-3 at the end of the first quarter, and it was a game that Sherman had well in hand. Much like last year, a game that Sherman won 62-0. They dominated defensively. Saginaw only finished with barely 130 yards of offense. They couldn't really run the ball. The one touchdown they did have was a 60-yard touchdown run late in the third quarter. And outside of that, they only had 11 other rushing yards on 37 other carries. So Saginaw couldn't really do anything offensively. Combined on the starting quarterback and the backup quarterback who had to come in the first half because of an injury, Sherman picked up 8 sacks. It was what you wanted to see against a team that you dominated last year, and we're expecting to do that again this year. Offensively, a very balanced attack, 217 yards rushing, 244 yards passing, and 6 different players scored touchdowns. Phoenix Grant had obviously all the passing yards, and he had a touchdown pass to Vontrell Sanders and to Ayers Jones. Sanders had 5 catches for 118 yards. Jones had 4 for 64. Elijah Chapman got in the Wildcat near the goal line, scored on a direct snap. Also scoring on the ground, Caleb Thompson, Collins Marithi, and Kane Bowen led the way yardage-wise and with 2 touchdowns. He had 11 carries for 76 yards on the ground. And it was Sherman's best offensive night rushing the ball, which is good to see. After the first 2 games, the running backs had not really done much contributing in the way it was mostly Phoenix Grant, but this was maybe potentially sort of breakout rhythm game for all 3 of those guys. And we'll see what that looks like against McKinney this week. Gonna be a little bit tougher against McKinney. McKinney won this game last year, 24-14. For those who remember, it was a game that got moved to a different stadium because of a power outage. Hopefully that doesn't happen this year, although Sherman does have a different stadium. If we have to leave Bearcat, they could finish the game up on campus. And I think the biggest thing about this is you have a Sherman team that looks like it's obviously getting better every week. They had the opener against Denison where they lost by three scores. Now you're in a situation where you bounced back with that last-second win to pull that game out against Mount Pleasant. You have a blowout victory last week against Saginaw. And now you have a chance to go into your bye, get ready for district play in 2 weeks with the win over McKinney. At home. It's homecoming, so there's all that sort of addedness to it. But I think you have a chance to really get some momentum going. I don't know. It's really hard to tell with their district, and I know we'll talk about this, if not next week, but the week after that. there's 5 teams in the district that are 2-1, and McKinney North and Tyler are the 2 schools that are 1-2. And it's people. It's been very up and down. Some people have looked good. Some people have not looked good in their wins. So it's gonna be really interesting to see after the games this week to see where people stand getting ready for district play. But Sherman, I think, is going to be in the mix. Like I said, they have definitely looked better. I think they are adjusting to what a new group of coaches, and with so many new guys starting on both sides of the ball. I think you can definitely see they're starting to be more comfortable. They're not. I don't know if tentative is maybe not the right word, but you're just trying to figure things out. And I think last week was a big chance to see what some guys could do throughout the game, because you get out to that early lead and you don't have to worry about things as much. And I think this McKinney game is gonna be a nice little test too. I think it's more towards the Mount Pleasant level of competition than maybe Saginaw was last week. So Sherman will try to make it 3 in a row when they host McKinney, getting ready for district play on Friday night. The next game, and again, these are all non-district. Denison was the only district game this week. The next one we have is Van Alstyne going to Gainesville. This is a 2-1 Gainesville team after the Panthers lost their first game 42-35 against Anna, and Gainesville is 0-3. They lost 62-6 against Aubrey. So Van Alstyne last week had a chance to get to 3-0. It was a 2-0 Anna team, a 2-0 Van Alstyne team, and unfortunately Van Alstyne came up short. Another close game. Last year their game came down to the end. This year, again, they tried to rally. They got within a touchdown, couldn't get the onside kick at the end to potentially force overtime. And so Van Alstyne suffers their first loss. The offense put up points. You scored 35 points. They had over 400 yards of offense. They had 234 yards on the ground. And Gavin Montgomery was 15 of 21 passing for 191 yards. And 3 touchdowns. 2 of those to Dakota Howard, who had 11 catches for 133 yards, and then Montgomery also ran 21 times for 126 yards, and a couple of scores as well. Jaden Mahan had 18 carries for 79 yards. The big thing defensively for Van Alstyne, Anna went to the air and hurt them there. Anna threw 57 times. And even though their completion percentage was, under 50% on that number, they got 355 yards passing, and all but one of their touchdowns was through the air. So, 2 of the touchdowns were on the ground, but all the other 4 were in the air. So, if they were able to do some things, hit some big plays in the passing game, to kind of win that shootout with Van Alstyne. Gainesville is off to, like I said, they're off to an 0-3 start. They're struggling defensively. They've given up at least 52 points in every game so far, and they're scuffling along. So this is a good chance for Gainesville to bounce back. This was a game that didn't get played last year. Gainesville had some COVID-19 issues when this week rolled around last year, so Van Alstyne ended up playing Maybank. But Gainesville's back on the schedule. And the last time they played in 2019, Gainesville won. But like I said, this is not that Gainesville, and I don't think last year's Gainesville. I think that was a game that Van Alstyne could have won. So I don't think that the fact when they played 2 years ago is indicative of anything. A lot of the faces are different compared to that last year. And like I said, Gainesville's really struggled so far, and this is a chance for Van Alstyne to kind of take advantage of that. And they still have a couple games before non-district or before district play starts. They're in that small district, so it'll be interesting to see what Van Alstyne can do, looking to bounce back from that loss to Anna last week. I would expect a lot of points, at least on the Van Alstyne side, and we'll see if Gainesville can potentially do anything defensively to kind of hold them down, to give them a chance. But they're, like I said, things have not gone very well for Gainesville. On both sides of the ball so far, starting out 0-3. They've only scored 69 points in 3 games. And like I said, last week they only had 6, and they had 41 the week before against Vernon. But when they opened against Caddo Mills, they lost 55-22. So 2 of the 3 games have not been close. So we'll have to see how things shape up. And of course, Vernon's only win is against Gainesville, so I don't know how good of a indicator that is as well. So we'll see if Van Alstyne can bounce back when they travel to Gainesville on Friday night for that non-district matchup. The other big matchup, or one of the other big matchups in the area, is Gunner at Pilot Point. This non-district matchup has 3-0 Gunner against 1-1 Pilot Point. Last week, Gunner won 28-6 against Whitesboro, and Pilot Point is coming off a loss, 29-28 against DeKalb. So we have 2 interesting games to talk about here for these 2 teams. So I guess we'll talk about Gunner first, because Whitesboro is not playing this week. They have their bye because they're going to start district play next week. And that game, Gunner gets up 21-0, 5 minutes into the game, and it is looking like what we kind of talked about last week. They've had fast starts against Sunnyvale, Pottsboro. You kind of expected against Whitesboro. Like I said, it's 21-0. Literally 5-6 minutes into that game, and then Whitesboro settles in, figures some stuff out, gets some turnovers. Gunner finished with 3 turnovers, and then they don't score for 2.5 quarters. They don't score until there's 2 minutes left in the game. Unfortunately for Whitesboro, they couldn't get anything going against what's obviously a really good Gunner defense. They scored late on a long touchdown pass in the middle of the 4th quarter from Mac Harper to Jay Sanders. Sanders had, let me get his totals here. He had 5 catches for 110 yards. But outside of that, Whitesboro really struggled moving the ball, especially on the ground. They had 34 carries for 58 yards. And Gunner has shut down everybody they've played. They have not allowed more than 1 touchdown in every game, and they've all come in the second half with the game out of reach. But this game, like I mentioned, it's 21-6. It's a 2-score game, and there's still half of the 4th quarter to go. So that was obviously kind of surprising. Ethan Sloan had 13 carries for 143 yards and a touchdown. Hudson Graham had 14 carries for 84 yards. He only threw for 72 yards. Did have a touchdown pass to Cole Lemons, who had 5 catches for 57 yards. Caden Rigsby had a touchdown run, and Ashton Bennett sort of sealed the win there in the final 2 minutes with his touchdown run to make it 28-6. So that's interesting to see what Gunner's going to look like coming off this game. I think we all thought that Pilot Point going into district play was going to be the toughest of those games, of the four non-district games, and they got tested by Whitesboro. So I think that bodes well for Whitesboro going into district play. I know they're only going into district play at 1-2. But the 1 win is in overtime against Bells, and Bells is a really good team. We'll talk about what they did to Valley View coming up here next. And their losses are to Gunner, who is really good, and to Aubrey and Foray, who is undefeated. And like we said, they've won all 3 of their games in blowouts. So I think Whitesboro they missed out on the playoffs last year on a tiebreaker. I have a sneaking suspicion that it's probably going to come down to the last couple of games again this year. It's a really good district. Pilot Point is in that district. So that's going to be interesting to kind of see if you want to compare a common opponent and see what Pilot Point does against Gunner. And Pilot Point's interesting because they opened with a victory, and then their game in week 2 was canceled against Fort Worth All Saints because they had that security threat at the high school, and so they were in lockdown, and they canceled all extracurricular activities, so that game got canceled. And then this last week was supposed to be their bye, but of course, since they didn't play, they were trying to find somebody to play. It took them a little bit to find somebody. They did find an opponent in DeKalb, and they lost that game late. They had a chance to be 2-0 coming into this game, and they lost to a team that I don't think a lot of people thought that they were going to lose to. And it was one of those games where they had their chances late. They're up 22-14. Pilot Point was heading to the fourth quarter. So they had the lead, and then they go and get a touchdown in the as time expired to give DeKalb that victory over Pilot Point 29-28. So Pilot Point's 1-1. Obviously not the way that they thought that they were going to be looking coming into this matchup. I'm sure they were thinking, we'll be 3-0 and Gunner will be 3-0 and it'll be a good matchup like we expect it to be. Gunner won last year 30-14. Gunner has actually won the last 5 meetings. And so I'm sure Pilot Point was really excited about playing this game to try to get some revenge on Gunner for what they've done recently. Basically the big thing to watch with Pilot Point is Ish Harris, their running back. Really great athlete, committed to Texas A&M. He's their main weapon. And so it's basically going to be, can the Gunner defense do what they've done to the three, like they've done to the first 3 opponents? Can they do that to Pilot Point? They obviously have, he's a senior, so they've dealt with him the last couple of years. I think they know how to attack what Pilot Point's going to want to do. But like I said, they're coming off a game where I don't know if they're necessarily sort of questioning things. But obviously, like I said, they struggled offensively for 2.5 quarters, and that's very un-Gunner-like. Based off what they did in the first 2 games. So I'm going to be really interested to see what what this is going to look like. And Pilot Point was a team that was ranked 2 weeks ago, and so I don't know what that means in terms of anything, but they obviously have talent. They made a deep run last year in the playoffs. They have a lot of guys that are back from that. So like I said, I think this was probably going to be the best team that they were going to play. Just based on the graduation losses and stuff for other people before getting in district. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in this matchup when Gunner goes to Pilot Point on Friday night. The other big game involving District 8 3A Division 2 is Bells. Bells will be hosting Holiday. This is 3-0 Holiday coming to town after winning 36-7 against Vernon. And Bells is coming off a big 60-6 win against Valley View. They are 2-1. They have bounced back well after their opening loss against Whitesboro in overtime. They went to Breckenridge 2 weeks ago after Howe had to cancel, and then they went on the road to Valley View this last week, and this was a game that was not in doubt at all. It was 54-6 at halftime. Bell scored 4 touchdowns in each of the first 2 quarters, and of course they did it running the ball because that's what Bells does. They ran for 365 yards on 33 carries, so that of course is more than 10 yards a carry. They only threw the ball twice, had 1 completion. Leading the way in this one was Brock Baker. He had 5 carries for 131 yards and 3 touchdown runs. Spencer Hines had 6 carries for 75 yards and a score. Bo Baker had 3 touchdowns. He didn't have a big night stat-wise. He only had 3 carries for 32 yards, but he did have a touchdown run mixed in that. He also caught the lone pass for 22 yards from Blake Rowland for the touchdown there. And he returned an interception 60 yards for a score. So even with his limited touches, depending on the where he was on the field, he was still able to score 3 times. And Roland added a touchdown run. Easton Helgren got in on the action. He had a touchdown run in the third quarter, and it was 60-6 after the third quarter. I think that's all the scoring that Bells had there. That is defensively. Valley View really only had one really good drive. Didn't get to 150 yards of offense. Had trouble running the ball. They had 59 yards on 21 carries. Had 3 turnovers. Like we mentioned, with Bo Baker returning the one of them for the score. So it was pretty much an early domination game. And this is a big matchup in terms of teams that think about making good showings once the playoffs get here. Holiday won this matchup last year, 34-21. And, Holiday, like I said, has always been good. We've talked about before. They've met Gunner plenty of time deep in the playoffs, usually, some region finals. They are ranked number 5 in 3A Division II. Gunner's at 2. Holiday moved up to 5 this week. So, again, this is another sort of measuring stick game if you're Bells to see where you're at, especially because you have Gunner looming here in district play in the next couple weeks. And Holiday's defense has really kind of shined in the early going. They've given up only 4 touchdowns in 3 games so far. So we're going to find out can Bells do anything against that sort of a defense? Especially with the potential of there could be a playoff rematch looming depending on how things shake out in their respective districts. So that's the third big game. For sure, there's definitely a top 3 in big games for the area, and that's one of them to see how Bells does when they host Holiday on Friday night. The all-local matchup, we'll hit that one next. 2 Grayson County teams. Collinsville will be traveling to SNS. You have Collinsville at 1-2, and SNS is 0-3. Collinsville got their first win last week to get off the schneid, 55-22 against McKinney Christian. SNS had a chance to get its first win last week, but they lost 34-28 against Alvord. And so this is an interesting matchup, obviously, for a couple reasons. You have, like I said, district play is right around the corner for these 2 schools as well. You have Collinsville with a chance to continue that momentum that had the big win last week against McKinney Christian. Even though they did give up points, one of them was on a kickoff return. But when you look at the yardage, they only gave up a total of 54 yards of offense. There was not a lot going on for McKinney Christian. They kind of got helped out, like I said, with the special teams with some penalties. And it was a game that was, I guess that's what, 43-7 after 3 quarters. So it wasn't really anything close to a game there. Leading the way for the Pirates was Lance Stone. He had 22 carries for 158 yards and 3 touchdowns. Garrett Trevino added 17 carries for 121 yards and a score. Logan Jenkins, he completed 14 of 16 passes for 128 yards and had touchdown passes to Carter Scott and Nathan Bocanegra. Oh, excuse me. Yes, I'm sorry. Hold on. Who did he have them to? Because Stone also had touchdown passes. No, that's a carry. I'm sorry. So Bocanegra and Carter Scott had the touchdown passes from Jenkins as they were able to really break out. The first couple weeks they had kind of scuffled. They had the close loss to Blue Ridge, and then struggling last week against Cooper. So they broke out in a big way. They're going to look to continue that against an SNS squad that had their game last week come down to the final minutes. They were actually able to tie it at 28 with 7 minutes left. Kevin Sanchez kicked a couple field goals, including the one to tie it at 28. Unfortunately, Alvord was able to go down and score and get the lead back, and they were able to hang on to beat the Rams in the closing minutes there. So unfortunately, SNS is still looking for its first win. Colton Corville led the way. He had 8 catches for 118 yards and a score. Gavin Collins had 83 yards on 22 carries, and Chase Sloan had 16 carries for 77 yards and 2 touchdowns in the game for SNS. I think the big thing with the Rams is they've gotten better every week. I think that's if you want to take a positive for where they're at in the season. I know a lot of they had the surprising season last year. At this point, they didn't play Alfred last year, so going into this game last year, they were 2-0, and so I know there's sort of some disappointment there. They are getting better, and of course, as people like to say, the district games are the ones that matter the most. This was a game last year that Collinsville won 28-3, so obviously they're feeling pretty good about their chances to get to 500 after this week. And like I said, SNS is playing better. They had a chance last week. They just were not able to get that final stop to either force overtime there at the end against Alvord. So that's an interesting matchup because, like I said, not only do you have the two local teams, but you have a team that's hungry for a win and a team that wants to keep some of that momentum going from their game last week. So that'll be interesting to see as Collinsville goes to SNS in non-district play on Friday night. Next up on the docket, we have Whitewright is going to Cooper. Whitewright is 1-2. They lost in overtime against Celeste, 41-35. Cooper is 3-0. They won 40-6 against Detroit. And so again, this is the last game before district play for Whitewright. So obviously they want to bounce back from a game last week that again the two games that they've lost, it has come down to the last couple of drives, the last couple of plays. Celeste was able to force overtime after Whitewright had gotten back in it. After being down, 28-14 at halftime, close game the whole way. Whitewright gets stopped on offense first, and then Celeste scores on their overtime possession to win that game. And of course, their game the game 2 weeks ago against Honeygrove, Whitewright is tied going to the fourth quarter, and Honeygrove scores twice to win that game 20-7. So that's going to be interesting to see what they can do against Cooper. Obviously Cooper's feeling good, and they run the ball a lot. Last week, Whitewright did a lot in the passing department. Caden Caraway threw for 310 yards, had 5 touchdowns. Most of that was to Maverick Sartain. He had 5 catches for 175 yards and 3 touchdowns. Zyron Daniels had 1 touchdown, and Caleb Kennemer had the other one. Most of them were all big plays. You had 61-yard pass, a 67-yard pass, a 44-yard pass, 61-yard pass. So there was a lot of big plays from the Whitewright offense to kind of get back in it / have a chance to win. And they're going to need to play well against Cooper. Like I said, they're off to a 3-0 start. This was a game that did not get played last year. It was canceled because of issues with COVID-19 at Cooper. So Whitewright played Redwater, and that was a team that they beat pretty handily at this point last year. So there's not really there's not a super recent history in regards to comparing scores. They did play in 2019 when they were in district together, and Whitewright won 28-13, but a lot of faces have changed for both of these teams, so I don't know what we can take out of that. But this may turn into Whitewright's passing attack, trying to move the ball against Cooper, doing their damage on the ground. So we'll see if Whitewright can bounce back from a couple of close losses, try to get back in the win column, getting ready for district play when they go to Cooper on Friday night. We'll get down to the 2A level after talking about Collinsville against SNS. So the interesting game here, you have Tioga hosting Rio Vista, and this is interesting because Tioga has a chance for its third straight victory. They are 2-1. They won 65-12 against Era, and Rio Vista is 1-1. They won last week 48-0 against Crossroads. obviously things have really turned around there at Tioga in the first year under Chad Rogers. We're probably going to say it every week because the first 3 weeks have been very much improved. This was a team last year that was 1-2, and the 2 losses were not close. Now you have a team that after losing the opening game by a touchdown, they could easily be 3-0. The last 2 weeks they have scored a total of 121 points. They put up 50 points in the win against Electra 2 weeks ago, and then this last week, obviously, they won 65-12 against Era in a game that was not close at all. It was 43-6 at halftime, and they've got the offense rolling there at Tioga. They had 412 yards rushing on only 32 carries. The big numbers in this one, almost again with nearly 3 100-yard rushers. Johnny Dorpinghouse had 8 carries for 202 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also caught a touchdown pass. He had 2 catches for 32 yards and a touchdown there. So he scored 4 times. Logan Westbrook had 14 carries for 115 yards and scored on the ground. He also had the touchdown. He had 2 touchdown passes. Was just 4 of 10 passing for 37 yards, but he also hit Tyler Henley for a touchdown pass. And then Chase Evans, 9 carries and 95 yards, had 2 touchdown runs. Caden Brennan had a fumble recovery on a punt return. He fell on that in the end zone, and that was the early touchdown there. And then outside of 2 big pass plays by Air for their touchdowns, Air only finished with 147 yards. They had 5 turnovers, 4 of them were fumbles, and so it's one of those deals where things are going really well at Tioga. Just to put into perspective, so they've scored 121 points the past 2 games. In the previous 10 games, counting the opener this year and their games last year, the prior 10 games, they only had 118 total points in that whole 10-game stretch, and they've surpassed that just the last 2 weeks. Rio Vista, I think, is going to be a step up. It's going to be more in the vein of their opener against Petrolia. In terms of competition, that was a game that Tioga lost 28-21. Rio Vista won 7 games last year, so that was their best year in 20 years. The last time they had won that many games was 2000. They're 1-1. They did have a game get canceled, and this was a game last year that Rio Vista won 62-0. I don't think that's going to be the case this year because so far Tioga has shown you cannot look at the scores from last year because the scores, they beat Electra very badly after Electra had beaten Tioga very badly. The scores are definitely not indicative in trying to prepare what to expect from Tioga so far this season. The 2 straight wins for Tioga, it's the first time since they jumped up to 11-man in 2018 that they've won consecutive games. Coming into this year, they had only won 5 games in the 3 seasons before this year, and they've already won 2 games so far. And they had that long stretch where they did not have football. The last time Tioga won 3 straight 11-man games because they did have such a really, really good success when they brought football back as a 6-man program was 1940. So it's a really long time that Tioga has a chance to put together a run. And again, continue to build up confidence going into district play. If they keep, they don't start district next week. They have a non-district game next week. But they have a chance to really continue to build that confidence, put some things together on both sides of the ball to where they can say, hey, we are a legit contender for a playoff spot. They probably already are, but they have a chance, to maybe be 4-1 going into district play, and if they do that, I think some people are going to probably start. If you're not picking them to make the playoffs, they're probably going to have a really good shot. And like I said, they've already surpassed last year's win total. They only won 1 game last year. It was against Era, so that they've already bettered that, and everything after that, is just adding to that foundation in the first year under Coach Rodgers to kind of get them going in the right direction. So going to be interesting to see what Tioga does against Rio Vista. Obviously, Rio Vista is coming off the shutout, and so they're playing well, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Bulldogs on Friday night. The last 11-man game that we have is Tom Bean against Como Picton. This game is going to be played in Trenton. It was supposed to be at Tom Bean, but Tomcat Stadium is still undergoing some renovations from the offseason that have been delayed, mostly because of the COVID-19 pandemic and getting materials shipped in time. Obviously, everybody's been dealing with that in terms of trying to purchase materials. Things get delayed. Shipments that are supposed to be here on a certain date or weeks late. They can only do so much at certain times. So the hope was when they made the plans in the off season to renovate, a majority of the around the field, put in a new track, put in new concessions, all that sort of stuff. Then it would be ready for this game. That's why they were going to play 3 games on the road and then have their homecoming this week. Then the next home game after this is a couple weeks away. It'll be in October. So I think they're planning on hopefully having it ready by then. But so this game is going to be at Trenton. So if you go by Tom Bean and you see it dark, that's why. So you're going to want to make sure to go for 7:30 over to Trenton. Tom Bean is 0-2. They lost to Clarksville 40-6, and Como Picton is 1-2. They're coming off a 34-14 loss against Prairieland. This game was supposed to be played last year. It did not because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Como Picton's district, 6-2A Division I, decided to move up the start of district play so that way they could start getting in games because they were afraid that games were going to get canceled and that was going to get messy. And unfortunately, that meant that Como Picton had to use this week in the schedule to play a district game instead of playing Tom Bean. Tom Bean found an opponent. It was going to be Quinlan Bowles. And then that week, Quinlan Bowles came down with cases of COVID-19. So Tom Bean ended up not playing at all. They've already not played. Remember 2 weeks ago, Tom Bean did not play their regularly scheduled game because the school district shut down over the Labor Day weekend. And they were able to get back on schedule. The plan was for all their teams to start last Tuesday. They were able to do that. And then play a normal on Friday at Clarksville. It did not go Tom Bean's way. They had the one touchdown. And I'm gonna pull that up here. Gage Moore had that. He had 2 catches for 74 yards. And it was 13-6 after the first quarter. And then Clarksville started to pull away. Tom Bean struggled offensively. Couldn't get much going. You barely finished with 175 yards of offense. And so that was, I don't know how much of that you can look at not playing for 2 weeks. I don't if guys were not playing sidelined or whatever, I'm not sure. Just looking at the box score, it does look like there might be some people that maybe were not involved. So you just don't know. But I think this is a chance for Tom Bean to get some, like I said, get that positive momentum going. There is no comparison because this game did not get played last year. The last time they played was 1985. That really doesn't help us in trying to figure things out. But like I said, the first game for Tom Bean, we talked about that, getting ready for the game that didn't happen. They played Morton really tough. You come down to the last minutes of that game, lose by 4. I think they looked at, they had a chance to build on that, and then you have the COVID-19 pause. It messes things up, messes up your routine. I said, I don't know. I assume they thought they were going to get ready for Clarksville, but you never know. After your game gets canceled, how much practice time do you do? Because are you afraid that it's gonna mean, if there's cases pop up or something that you're not gonna play. So you try to limit contact and do things remotely with meetings and that sort of thing. So I'm not 100% sure what we're going to see out of Tom Bean after playing Clarksville. like I said, they've got 2 games left as well before starting district play, and I know that they're going to want to start to get that positive momentum going so they can kind of be in that mix in the playoffs, in that playoff chase, which is going to be a really interesting one in 5-2A Division 1 for sure. And the last game we'll talk about to get ready for is Lucas Christian at Texoma Christian. Lucas Christian is 2-0. Texoma Christian is 0-3. TCS lost last week 38-20 against Denton Cavalry, and Lucas Christian won 50-0 against Garland Christian Academy. These teams did not play last year. It seems like a lot of Texoma Christian's schedule is just, the COVID-19 schedule was really sort of thrown together to get as many games in as possible, and they weren't even able to get that many games in into the deal. But Texoma Christian has district play looming. They definitely want to get some positive momentum going. Said they're 0-3. Their offense has basically been Hayden Turner and not a whole lot else. And they really need that second. Third banana to get things going offensively. I think they've been okay. If you look at the scores, if you hold somebody to 38, I feel that's that's good for your defense, for sure. But they just haven't been able to put it all together. And Lucas Christian obviously coming in 2-0, coming off a shutout. They only allowed 10 points in their first game. They won their first game 58-10. So this is going to be interesting to see. Of course, the big thing with Texoma Christian is once you get into district play, they struggled early on last year. They started 0-4 last year, still made the playoffs out of their district. So it will be interesting to see what happens with TCS, see if they can get on the board, get some of that positive momentum going before district play. And I will mention at the end, I know they don't have games to get ready for this week, although one of them might if they do find a game. I don't know if they will. I did kind of skip over them in 3A. Both Pottsboro and Howe join Whitesboro as teams that have byes this week. Howe did play last week. They went to Sanger and they lost 61-24. Much like the Tom Bean game, it was 14-10 Sanger after the first quarter. It was actually 17-14 Howe early in the second quarter, and then S&S just pulled away, blew things open. They put up some big numbers, specifically passing. They threw, Sanger's quarterback threw for 374 yards, and I think he had 6 touchdowns. Yes, 6 touchdowns. Austin Haley tried to match him. He threw for 295, was 28-47 for 295. He had a couple of touchdown passes to Ryan Huff, who had 9 catches for 96 yards. Cooper Jones, 7 for 79. Ethan Lopez, 8 for 60. Carson Daniels added a touchdown run in the fourth quarter, but they just were not able to play that shootout game. Sanger finished with almost 600 yards of offense. So Howe is looking to get some stuff going as they enter district play. They are 0-2. We did mention they did not play 2 weeks ago. They had their game canceled against Bells, and after the loss to Callisburg. So if there's a little bit of a silver lining, I think one, if you're Howe, you're healthy or healthier, and you're playing well in stretches. They're scoring points, which obviously was something they struggled with. The defense needs to clean things up, and I know that's something Coach Jelling said before the season, that we need to be better on defense if we're going to have a chance, especially in this district. So they have the bye this week, and then they will host Pottsboro next Friday night to kick off 5-3A Division 1 play. Pottsboro is off this week. As of right now, as of this taping, this was their regularly scheduled bye. However, they did not play last week. They were scheduled, we mentioned this last week on the podcast. Pottsboro Melissa was in week 3 last year, and they decided to, in the offseason, to cancel that matchup. Pottsboro was looking for an opponent. They were not able to find one. And of course, because this was also their bye week, they could have taken their bye in week 3 and then played in week 4. I talked to Coach Poe leading up to the week 3. When week 3 started, I said, hey, were you able to find something? He said no. I have asked him early this week, hey, have you found something? He said no. It doesn't sound like they're going to be able to find somebody. I don't know if they want to take the risk at this point of playing and then going, if somebody gets hurt or whatever, and then going into the games that count in their district play. So that's a bit of a bummer. Obviously, that means the most games they could play is 9. They are 0-2, and I thought maybe they would want to potentially get back on the field so they could get a little positive momentum. After they lost to Gunner 51-7. Obviously, that's a tough finish to sit on for a couple of weeks. And they may find somebody. I'm not sure. I know we've had COVID-19 cancellations every week through as we enter week 4. There's been a chunk of games available for people to play. So by the time you listen to this, there's a chance that Pottsboro plays. I don't think it's going to happen though. I think they're just going to take the bye again this week, work on things practice wise, and then gear up for Howe just kick off district play next week. So that's where we are at week 4. I really can't believe that we're already a month into the season. It's crazy how fast you get going. You get all that build up over the summer. That whole month of August, just getting everybody's getting ready, and then boom, it's here, and it's like, oh my God, we're already on people playing their 4th game. It's crazy to think about that. Every week it happens. It's so quick, and there's so many good games, so many outcomes to talk about. So I'm glad you always tune in every week, and we'll see what happens in week 4. We'll be back next week to talk about all the action. We'll probably do a lot of district look ahead next week because teams will be on teams will either be beginning district or they will be on their byes, getting ready for district play the following week. So a lot to always talk about here on the podcast, and I thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.